Welcome to the deep dive. How often do we just, rattle off words like jack or jargon without even a second thought about where they actually came from?
Mm,
Their hidden histories, the sort of incredible journeys they've taken over centuries. It seems so simple, right?
it does.
But the story behind almost every single word we use is actually, well, it's mind-blowing when you dig in.
Indeed. And what's truly fascinating is how these seemingly simple words, the ones we use every single day, often carry these incredible layers of history, cultural shifts, even forgotten beliefs.
Yeah.
We're about to take a deep dive into the source you've provided us, the Oxford Dictionary of Word Histories, and really pull out the most compelling nuggets. Think of it as offering you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about the very fabric of our language.
Absolutely. Our mission today is exactly that. Uncover those surprising facts and really connect the dots, in the whole tapestry of language. And specifically, we are focusing on words beginning with the letter J from this incredible resource. So, what amazing stories are waiting for us here in the J section?
Well, this deep dive into the J's is it's more than just looking up words. It's a unique window into how language itself evolves. We'll explore how some words change drastically in meaning. Over time, linguists actually call this semantic shift.
Semantic shift. Okay.
Yeah. While others, remarkably, echo their ancient roots really faithfully. This exploration offers some profound insight into the human mind's tendency to create, to adapt, and even to sort of playfully distort meaning.
Right.
You'll see how even the smallest shift can reveal a change in culture, maybe technology, or even our collective sense of humor. It's quite revealing.
That's right. So by the end of this, you, our listener, are going to have a completely new appreciation for the words you speak and write every single day. They won't just be static definitions anymore. They'll feel like living artifacts carrying centuries of stories, whispers of forgotten beliefs, echoes of historical moments. So let's just jump right in and uncover some of these linguistic treasures.
Sounds great.
Okay, so I've always been fascinated by how words evolve, but one thing that truly stands out in this dictionary, especially looking at the J's, is how many everyday words actually started as someone's name, or maybe a place, or even a specific character,
Yes.
and then just, boom, exploded into general use. It feels kind of wild to think a single name could generate so many different meanings.
It really does. And this phenomenon, where proper names become common nouns or verbs, it's often called eponyms.
Eponyms, okay.
It raises a really important question. What does it tell us about human nature and our language that we take specific identities, like a person's name, and generalize them into concepts or objects?
Yeah, what does it tell us?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it seems to speak to our deep tendency to personify abstract ideas, maybe to assign agency to inanimate objects, or even just to derive utility and generalize characteristics from specific examples.
Mm.
It makes language incredibly dynamic and often very relatable because it's rooted so deeply in the human experience.
And the ultimate example of this, truly the poster child for proper names becoming everything else, has got to be Jack. It's astonishing.
It really is.
From Jack, a pet form of the given name John, which is already a super common name, it just became this entire universe of meaning. How does one name get so wildly versatile?
The journey of Jack is, as you say, it's a masterclass in what linguists call semantic expansion.
Semantic expansion. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's when a word's meaning just broadens out dramatically to cover this huge range of related or sometimes seemingly unrelated ideas. It's like a linguistic explosion from a single point.
Okay.
Originally, back in late Middle English, Jack simply referred to an ordinary man.
Yeah.
Think of it as the ultimate everyman, the common fellow.
Like Joe Bloggs or John Doe, but Jack.
Exactly. But by the mid-16th century, its meaning broadened even further to include a youth or chap.
So it really was the every guy name, but then it got even more specific, didn't it? Like in card games. The knave became the jack.
Precisely. That was a significant shift. And it was a widely recognized one, even showing up in literature. Charles Dickens, for instance, he highlighted this in Great Expectations. He noted, and I'm quoting here, he calls the knaves jacks, this boy.
Huh. Okay, so it was common knowledge by then.
It shows how deeply embedded this new usage was. But it certainly didn't stop there, not by a long shot.
And it still feels like we're just scratching the surface. We also get jackass for a male animal, right?
We do.
And then it takes this incredible leap into the world of tools and devices. What's the logic behind naming a tool Jack?
Well, the logic is quite fascinating, and it speaks again to our tendency to assign human-like qualities or functions to objects. Jack became a term for various devices saving human labor as so one had a helper.
Ah, like a little helper.
Exactly. Consider a car jack. It lifts a heavy vehicle, as if a strong helper were doing it for you.
Mm.
Or a jackhammer, simulating intense manual labor. Even a jackknife, a versatile tool that helps in all sorts of tasks.
Yeah.
The very idea of a reliable helper, an extension of human effort or ingenuity, became embedded in this versatile name. It's a remarkable kind of anthropomorphization of inanimate objects, transforming them into linguistic little workers.
And it continued into professions like a lumberjack or a steeplejack. That general sense of just laborer arose in the early 18th century, and it's still totally with us.
Absolutely.
It's like Jack became the default prefix for anyone doing robust physical work.
Exactly. It became synonymous with a certain kind of practical, hands-on activity. But then, intriguingly, from the mid-16th century, a notion of smallness also attached itself to Jack.
Smallness, how does that fit?
Well, you see this in the game of bowls, where the jack is the small target ball.
Oh, right, the little white ball.
Exactly. So it's a linguistic paradox.
Right.
From the everyman to the miniature target.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's the compound jackpot emerging in the late 19th century.
From poker.
Right, from a specific form of poker where the jackpot, accumulated until a player could open the bidding with 2 jacks or better. The name became so ubiquitous that it even described a specific high-stakes moment in a card game. It's truly a testament to its incredible semantic versatility, from the common man to a specific poker hand and pretty much everything in between.
It's just wild. So Jack is clearly the linguistic chameleon of the English language, truly mind-boggling. But speaking of how common things get names, I'm curious, how did the very garment I might be wearing, a jacket, end up with its name? It seems like such an everyday item.
That's a wonderful pivot. The transition brings us to jacket, and it's another intriguing journey. The word comes from Old French jaquet,
Jacket, okay.
which was a diminutive, a smaller form of Jacques.
Mm.
Now, while its exact origin is still debated, it's strongly suspected to be linked to the given name Jacques.
Which is French for James.
Exactly. And of course, Jack is often seen as an anglicized variant of Jacques, so there's that connection again. The Jacques was an everyday garment, often a short, close-fitting tunic worn by common people, especially in rural areas.
So it's a simple, everyday piece of clothing for everyday people, kind of echoing that Jack the Everyman concept again. Suggests something practical, universally used.
Precisely. And the fascinating semantic leap happens when this garment, associated with a certain type of person or function, evolves to describe a protective covering for something totally inanimate.
Like a book jacket.
Exactly. A book jacket, a term that became common in the late 19th century. Just as a jacket protects a person, the book jacket protects the book. It's a functional extension of the word, showing how language adapts a known concept to new inventions or uses. Really clever, actually.
And keeping with the theme of common names turning into tools, we have Jemmy. It sounds like a direct cousin to Jack, right? Used for a simple, robust tool.
It is, absolutely. Jemmy refers to a short crowbar, and its name is derived from James.
Ah, another common name.
Exactly. Which, like John for Jack, is another common male pet form. The source explicitly states it's comparable to Jack, reinforcing this fascinating pattern of tools or devices being named after common male names.
Implying that helper quality again.
It often implies that sense, a straightforward, robust, or helpful quality, simple tools for everyday tasks, much like the everyman they're named after.
Now, from a helper to something that can manipulate, the word jockey has quite the arc, doesn't it? From underling to someone who can really, well, jockey for position.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Does it tell us anything about how language handles maybe negative connotations?
That's a fantastic question. Jockey is a diminutive of jock, which is another form of John, much like Jack.
Right, jock.
A diminutive is essentially a smaller, often more familiar version of a name, but here it takes on a professional role. It began, like Jack, as a general term for an ordinary man, lad, or underling. Its evolution is quite telling. It first came to mean mounted courier, someone riding horses to deliver messages,
Okay, a rider.
which then gave rise to its current sense in the late 17th century of someone who races horses.
So someone who rides horses for a living, simple enough. But then there's that darker side, the manipulative jockeying for position. Where does that come in?
Exactly. Another early use, even predating the horse racing sense, was for a horse dealer. And here's where the negative connotation creeps in.
Ah, the dodgy horse dealer stereotype.
Precisely. Horse dealers had long been, and I quote the source, a byword for dishonesty, known for manipulating sales and being generally untrustworthy.
Okay, so That reputation stuck to the word.
It seems very likely that this deeply ingrained reputation gave rise to the verb sense manipulate, as in jockeying the figures or jockeying for advantage.
Right.
Now, the main verb sense of maneuvering for an advantageous position can certainly relate to the actual skilled behavior of jockeys in a race, their skill in navigating, blocking, finding the best path.
Sure, the physical skill.
But that older association with shrewdness, bordering on trickery from the horse-dealer connection, certainly colors its metaphorical use. It powerfully illustrates how a profession's perceived characteristics, whether skill, speed, or even perceived trickery, can become deeply embedded in a word's broader meaning, shaping its metaphorical applications down the line.
What about jug? That one also sounds like it could be a proper name, and it has that interesting link from a container to, well, to prison. How does that work?
It does. Jug is perhaps an extended use of jug, which itself is a pet form of given names like Joan, Joanna, and even Jenny.
So another common name, this time female.
Yes. So we have a container, typically with a handle and, crucially, a narrow entrance, taking on a person's name.
And then that narrow entrance leads to a slang term for prison. That's a really vivid image, isn't it? That narrow opening leading to confinement. It's almost an instant metaphor. Was that specific connection unique to Jug? Or do we see other examples where physical features inspire such powerful, often kind of grim metaphors in language?
It is indeed a powerful and quite specific metaphor. While maybe not every container name word becomes a prison, the source highlights this very interesting connection. It notes that precisely because of the narrow entrance of this type of container, the word specifically as stone jug in the early 19th century U.S. became a slang term for prison.
Stone jug. Wow.
It's a very vivid, almost poetic link between the physical form of the container and the confined space of incarceration. It speaks to how human perception finds parallels and symbolism in everyday objects, shaping our language in really unexpected ways.
And from a container to an elephant, Jumbo, that one immediately brings to mind something enormous. Was that elephant really that influential? I mean, just one elephant?
Unquestionably. The word jumbo was originally applied to a large and clumsy person and is thought possibly to be the second element of mumbo-jumbo, that phrase for confusing or ritualistic speech.
Right, mumbo jumbo.
However, its massive popularization, which really solidified its meaning of huge in English, came directly from the famous elephant at London Zoo.
The one sold to P.T. Barnum.
Exactly. Sold to the American circus impresario P.T. Barnum in 1882 for his Barnum and Bailey Circus. The public outcry in Britain and the sheer fascination around this magnificent, enormous creature were immense. It was a huge news story.
It makes you wonder, if that elephant hadn't been sold, if it hadn't gone to Barnum and Bailey, would jumbo still just be a relatively obscure word for a clumsy person? It's almost like a word became famous overnight, like a viral video today or something.
That's a perfect analogy. This is a classic case study of how a specific, highly publicized, almost iconic instance can elevate a word from relative obscurity right into common usage, completely solidifying its meaning for generations. It's the power of popular culture and media attention at work, even back in the 19th century.
It's incredible how quickly that can happen. And speaking of rapid adoption, think about wartime coinages like Jeep and Jerrycan. They feel so ingrained now, but they're relatively modern, aren't they? Born out of specific historical necessity.
They are indeed. Jeep originated in the U.S. during WWII. It comes from the initials GP, standing for General Purpose.
GP General Purpose, okay.
This designation was for a lightweight, rugged military vehicle. However, and this is the fun part, this practical choice was heavily influenced by Eugene the Jeep.
From the Popeye comics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A resourceful and powerful, almost magical creature introduced in the Popeye comic strip back in 1936. So it was this potent blend of practical military designation and popular culture, giving the vehicle a memorable, almost mythical quality right from the start.
That's brilliant. And Jerrycan, also WWII.
Also WWII, and equally fascinating, it's based on Jerry, which was that colloquial and often derogatory term for German used by Allied soldiers.
Right.
Because the Germans were the first to develop and use these highly efficient, rectangular fuel containers that could be easily stacked and carried. They were a genuinely clever design.
So the name acknowledges the origin, even if it uses a derogatory term.
Precisely. It's a stark reminder of how historical events, conflict, and even cultural caricatures can rapidly introduce and disseminate new words into the lexicon, often tying them permanently to that specific moment in time.
The power of a catchy song or even a conjurer's word to shape language is also fascinating, like jingo. It seems so tied to politics now, aggressive nationalism, but its root is something completely different, right? Almost whimsical.
Jingo is a particularly vivid example of popular culture shaping a word's meaning in a really dramatic way. In the late 17th century, it was originally just a conjurer's word, a bit of magical patter like hey presto or hocus pocus,
So just a nonsense word for a magic trick.
pretty much. But it's used to denote a vociferous supporter of policy favoring war, what we now call jingoism, derives directly from the phrase by jingo in a hugely popular music hall song from 1878.
Ah, the one that supported Lord Beaconsfield's policy against Russia. I think I know the one. It had that really famous chorus.
That's the one. The chorus went, "We don't want to fight, yet by jingo. If we do, we've got the ships, we've got the men, and got the money too."
Wow, that's blatant.
It really captured the mood. That song, in that specific cultural and political moment of heightened imperialistic sentiment, transformed a seemingly innocuous, even magical exclamation into a powerful symbol of aggressive nationalism. This gave us the noun jingoism by the late 19th century.
So a music hall hit literally created a political term.
It powerfully demonstrates how social and political fervor, especially when amplified through popular media like music halls, can embed itself into language, forever altering a word's meaning. It's a prime example of a word gaining this deep ideological weight through cultural association.
And then there's Jodhpurs, which is a much more straightforward example, isn't it? A place name influencing language, specifically clothing.
Correct. Jodhpurs directly comes from Jodhpur, a princely state and city in western India.
Known for horses.
Exactly. Known for its rich equestrian culture and cavalry traditions. The garments themselves, characterized by their flared thighs and tight fit around the calves, were specifically designed for riding.
Makes sense for writing.
And they were popularized in the West by British polo players and other equestrians in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They adopted this comfortable and practical riding attire they encountered in India.
So it's a straight borrowing.
It's a clear instance of how place names can become embedded in specific items, particularly clothing or artifacts, that are strongly associated with that location's culture or practices.
And finally, in this section of names and places influencing language, we have jovial, which takes us straight into the stars and ancient beliefs. This is amazing.
Jovial is a beautiful example of how ancient beliefs and celestial connections have left their indelible mark on our language, even if we don't consciously think of the connection anymore.
Where does it come from?
It comes from French, derived from the late Latin jovialis,
Jovialis.
literally meaning of Jupiter.
The planet Jupiter.
Yes. This references the supposed influence of the planet Jupiter on those born under its astrological sign. Jupiter was considered a benevolent, expansive, fortunate planet.
So good vibes from Jupiter.
Yes, and those born under its influence were believed to possess a cheerful, good-humored, generally positive disposition. Jove, of course, was the poetic equivalent of Jupiter, the highest god in the ancient Roman pantheon, associated with beneficence and good fortune.
So someone who was born under Jupiter was thought to be, well, jolly and good-natured. It ties personality traits directly to planetary influences, almost like a pre-scientific personality test encoded right there in a word.
Precisely. It's a linguistic fossil of ancient astrological thought. It shows how deeply intertwined our early scientific understandings, our spiritual beliefs, and even our earliest attempts at psychology were with our vocabulary.
Wow.
It reminds us that language is not just about communication. It's this incredible repository of human history and belief systems, often preserving concepts that have long faded from common understanding.
Okay, so we've gone from names and places to actions and sounds. Some of these next words just sound like what they mean, don't they? It's like language is trying to perfectly capture a moment, a feeling, or maybe a quick burst of energy. You can almost hear or feel the word itself.
What's truly fascinating here is how often language mirrors our sensory experiences. These are examples where the phonetic qualities of a word directly evoke the action or sound they represent. It's a linguistic phenomenon we call onomatopoeia.
Onomatopoeia, like buzz or hiss.
Exactly. Or words that are imitative of sounds more generally. This shows a very primal, almost instinctual connection between sound and meaning, revealing how our brains naturally link the auditory to the conceptual. It raises an important question, though. How much of our language is rooted in such direct visceral associations, and how do those associations evolve and maybe become more abstract over time?
Like jab. You hear it and you immediately think of a short, forceful, punchy action. It's so direct, isn't it?
Exactly. Jab emerged in the early 19th century, originally a Scots word, and it's a variant of the late Middle English job, meaning stab or prod.
Job used to mean stab.
In that context, yes. So jab is inherently symbolic of a brief, forceful, sharp action. Think of a quick pointed strike in boxing.
Yeah.
But then, quite remarkably, it took on a very specific and significant medical application in the 1920s, meaning inoculate, as in getting a vaccine shot, getting a jab.
Getting your jab,
Yeah.
of course.
This is a great illustration of how a generic action word can become a precise, technical medical term, retaining its core sense of a quick, sharp insertion, but applying it to a completely new context.
And jabber.
Yeah.
That just sounds like rapid, excited, maybe even incoherent talk, doesn't it? You can almost hear the frantic sounds, like someone just jabbering away.
It does, perfectly. Jabber, from the late 15th century, is explicitly described in the dictionary as imitative of rapid and excited talk. It evokes the sound of someone speaking quickly, perhaps unintelligibly, or with great agitation.
Right.
It's why Lewis Carroll could so perfectly capture the essence of meaningless language with the word Jabberwocky in his 1871 poem. The sound of the word itself perfectly conveys the notion of incoherent, rapid-fire speech, making it immediately understandable even without a formal definition. It's truly a phonetic masterpiece in a way.
Jam. That one feels like it encapsulates a few different meanings that all kind of stem from the same core idea of squeezing or compacting something together. From fruit preserve to traffic to music.
Indeed. The word jam in the sense of squeeze, pack, emerged in the early 18th century, and it's probably symbolic of the action itself, much like the word cram.
Right, cramming things in.
This core sense of physical compression or forcing things together then extends, quite naturally, to the thick fruit conserve we call jam, first recorded from the mid-18th century. It's fruit that has been packed and thickened through cooking.
Okay, so packed fruit.
And then, quite remarkably, it becomes a jazz term in the 1920s.
A jam session.
Right, implying a spontaneous, intense gathering where musicians pack together or improvise closely, creating this tightly woven, often energetic sound. And of course, the ever-frustrating traffic jam, where cars are compacted together, unable to move.
Ugh, don't remind me.
It vividly shows how the core sense of compacting or coming together closely can have such diverse manifestations across vastly different contexts, culinary, automotive, musical. It's incredibly flexible.
From packing to jangling. Jangle also sounds like a noise, obviously, but it has a surprisingly different original meaning relating to noisy talk, doesn't it?
It does. In Middle English, jangle initially meant to talk excessively or noisily, to squabble. It comes from Old French jangler, which had a similar meaning.
So annoying chatter originally.
Yes, this human-centric noisy talk. But then it seems to have been subtly influenced by the word jingle, which is more associated with the metallic sounds.
Ah, like keys jangling.
Exactly. So while it retains the idea of noise, its phonetic proximity to jingle may have subtly shifted its semantic space to include the clanging or rattling sounds we often associate with it today. It's a word that sort of bridges the human and the inanimate in its sonic representation.
Jerk is one of those words that has a very clear physical origin. You can almost feel it, but then took a sharp turn into something completely different and quite insulting.
Jerk was first recorded in the mid-16th century, meaning a stroke with a whip, and it's probably imitative of that sharp, sudden, almost violent action.
A sharp pull or movement.
Yes. The fascinating and rather dramatic semantic shift comes with its slang use, meaning fool, stupid person, which is originally a U.S. usage dating from the 1930s.
Calling someone a jerk.
Yeah. This is a classic example of metaphoric extension in language, where a sharp, sudden, or irritating physical action becomes tied, somehow, to perceived sudden, clumsy, or irritating behaviors in a person, leading to a derogatory term. It's a linguistic judgment on character derived directly from a physical movement.
Jog is another one that feels very kinetic, very motion-oriented, and then a recent twist gives it a very modern meaning tied to fitness.
Jog appeared in the early 16th century, and its origin is uncertain, but it certainly appears onomatopoeic, conveying a gentle, repetitive movement, perhaps a slight push or shake, a jolting motion?
Like jogging someone's elbow.
Perhaps. Its more recent use, however, is a strong example of a word being revitalized or gaining new prominence through cultural trends. extended from context of horse riding at a jolting pace.
Ah, like a horse jogging along.
Exactly. Its association with keep fit exercise dates specifically from the 1960s, directly reflecting the rise of modern fitness culture and the popularity of running for health. It's a word that truly galloped into contemporary relevance.
And jump. You can practically hear the feet hitting the ground when you say that word. It's so visceral, so immediate.
You can, absolutely. Jump, from the early 16th century, first meant be moved or thrown with a sudden jerk. It's highly likely imitative of the sound of feet coming into forceful contact with the ground, or maybe the sudden, sharp sound of an object springing.
The sound itself.
Yes, this direct sensory link then contributes to new compound words, like jumpsuit,
Right, a jumpsuit.
which emerged in the 1940s in the U.S., originally as a practical one-piece garment for parachutists, a very specific application of jumping, where the clothing needs to accommodate sudden dynamic movement.
Jumble is another one that perfectly captures the feeling of disorder, like a chaotic mix of things all thrown together.
Jumble, from the early 16th century, is probably symbolic of disorder. Its very sound seems to embody the messiness.
Wow.
And you can hear how it shares phonetic qualities with other words conveying similar notions of clumsiness or disarray, like bumble, fumble, mumble, and tumble. That umble sound seems to suggest a lack of grace or order, doesn't it?
It really does, that umble ending.
It also took on a specific meaning for secondhand articles sold for charity, like at a jumble sale from the late 19th century, where things are often presented in a jumbled or disordered state, reinforcing that core meaning.
And finally, in this sound action group, jut. Just like a thing sticking out. Simple, effective, descriptive.
Jut, from the mid-16th century, is actually a variant of jet, which first meant jut out.
Jet, like a jet of water.
Well, jet originally meant to throw or to strut, implying something thrown forward or projecting. So jut implies something that is thrown out or projects sharply from a surface. It's a simple, very descriptive word for protrusion. It just paints a picture immediately.
Okay, we've explored words that echo their sound in action. But now for some words that took truly astonishing U-turns in their meaning. Complete transformations. How does a word go from, say, a noble deed to a mere joke? Or from a really troublesome trip to a fun little pleasure excursion? It's like these words have these secret lives undergoing incredible, sometimes totally contradictory semantic shifts.
This is where we see the immense power of metaphorical extension and also cultural adaptation in language. It's really fascinating. When we connect this to the bigger picture, it illustrates how our understanding of the world, our values, our changing social norms, even our superstitions are deeply embedded in the very words we use.
It makes you think.
It encourages critical thinking about how seemingly stable meanings are actually quite fluid and subject to profound shifts over time, often reflecting really profound societal changes.
And our first word here, jade, really throws a curveball. Because there are actually two entirely different jades, spelled and pronounced exactly the same, but with totally separate origins. That's a remarkable linguistic coincidence, isn't it?
It truly is remarkable, a homonym with completely different roots. So, jade, the hard green stone, the gemstone, highly valued for ornaments and sculptures.
The pretty one.
Yes, that appeared in the late 16th century. It comes from the French le jade, which was itself derived from the Spanish piedra de hijada.
Piedra de hijada. What does that mean?
It means stone of the flank or stone of the side.
Stone of the flank. Why?
This unusual name comes from a specific medieval medical belief. It was believed that placing this green stone on the side of the body could cure colic, which was sometimes called pain in the flank.
No way. So a medical belief, probably wrong, gave us the word for a precious gemstone.
That's exactly it. A practical, albeit mistaken, medical application led to the name of a beautiful stone. But then, completely separately, we have jade.
And this one is less appealing.
Much less appealing. Jade, meaning worn-out horse, is from late Middle English, and its origin is completely unknown.
A useless old horse.
Yes, and it eventually extended to refer, quite nastily, to a worthless or bad-tempered woman. It's a striking example of how two entirely unrelated words, just by chance, can converge in pronunciation and spelling, leading to a single form in modern English with vastly different histories and meanings, one rooted in a specific medical belief in mineral, the other referring to a state of exhaustion or used as a term of disparagement. It's like having identical twins with completely different backstories who don't even know each other exist.
Now, jaunt is a word that has had a complete reversal of fortune. It went from sounding like a painful chore to a fun little outing. How does that happen?
It has, and it's a brilliant example of how quickly social perceptions or common usage can completely reshape a word's emotional weight, its connotation. Jaunt, appearing in the late 16th century, is of unknown origin, but its early senses were decidedly negative, depreciatory.
Like what?
It originally meant things like to tire a horse out by riding it up and down unnecessarily, or to traipse about aimlessly, or as a noun, it meant a troublesome journey or an arduous task. Not fun at all.
Definitely not fun.
But remarkably, its current positive sense of an excursion for pleasure, a short trip for enjoyment, dates from the mid-17th century.
So within maybe 50-ish years, it flipped completely.
Roughly, yes.
Huh?
This profound flip speaks to how quickly language can adapt to changing social contexts or attitudes, turning something formerly negative into an enjoyable experience. Maybe people started using it ironically, and the irony stuck. We don't know for sure, but the change is dramatic.
Similarly, jaunty went from being quite formal, almost stuffy, to something much more lively and cheerful.
Jaunty, from the mid-17th century, had an early sense of well-bred genteel. It comes directly from the French word gentil.
Genteel, like gentlemanly.
Exactly, meaning noble, well-born. It implied a certain elegance and good breeding, but it has since undergone a subtle but significant shift. While it still can imply a certain grace and style, it now mostly conveys a more active and spirited sense. Lively, cheerful, and self-confident.
More about attitude than birth.
Precisely. It's a good example of how words associated with social status or formal attributes can broaden their appeal and become more dynamic, moving from describing static qualities to embodying an energetic demeanor.
Jargon is a fantastic one because it keeps its core idea of being hard to understand, but completely changes what it's referring to, starting with birdsong and ending up as highly technical language. That's quite a journey.
It really is. Jargon, from late Middle English, originally meant twittering, chattering, like the sound birds make. Later, it broadened slightly to mean gibberish, or any kind of unintelligible noise.
Yeah.
It comes from Old French jargon, which also meant the warbling of birds. Its ultimate origin is unknown. But what's fascinating here is the consistent thread through its entire semantic evolution, language that is hard for outsiders to understand.
Right, it's always exclusive in some way.
Exactly. It shifted from incomprehensible animal sounds to meaningless human speech, and finally, by the mid-17th century, to highly specialized, precise language like legal jargon or computer jargon. The incomprehensibility remains the key, but the source and purpose of the language have completely transformed, from natural sound to complex, human-made systems of communication.
It highlights our tendency to create these specialized vocabularies, doesn't it? Insider language.
It does. Vocabularies that can both facilitate communication within a group and simultaneously hinder it for those outside the group.
And jaundice, with its direct physical link, the yellowing, creating a metaphor for an emotional state. That visual connection is so strong and kind of intuitive.
It is, powerfully so. Jaundice, the medical condition, comes from Middle English, from Old French jaundice, meaning yellowness, which itself is from jaune, the French word for yellow.
So literally yellowness.
Yes. This physiological link, the yellowing of the skin and eyes due to liver issues, directly creates a vivid metaphor for emotional coloring. The figurative use of the adjective jaundice to mean colored or distorted by envy, resentment, or prejudice dates from the mid-17th century.
Seeing the world through yellow-tinted glasses, but emotionally.
That's a great way to put it. The idea is that prejudice, like the illness jaundice, tints one's perception, making everything appear in a particular, often negative light. This figurative adjective then, apparently, became the source of the verb to jaundice someone in the late 18th century, meaning to affect with envy or prejudice.
So the state came before the action of causing it.
It seems so. It's a striking example of how a physical symptom becomes a powerful descriptor for a state of mind through a direct visual and conceptual association.
Okay, from the physical to the metaphorical. This has one of the most profound semantic shifts I've ever heard of. From heroic deeds to a simple punchline. That's a huge leap, a massive change in significance.
This is truly remarkable, and it speaks volumes about how cultural priorities can change over time. Jest, from late Middle English, comes from the earlier word geste.
Gest. G-E-S-T.
Yes, which in Old French was geste, and ultimately came from Latin gesta, meaning actions, exploits. The root is the Latin verb gere, to do, So fundamentally, the original jest or jest was an exploit, a heroic deed.
Like the deeds of knights or heroes.
Exactly. And then it also came to mean a narrative of such deeds, often recounted in epic verse. Think of the chansons de geste, the songs of deeds.
Okay, grand stories.
But then it took a very significant turn. It came to mean an idle tale, something not serious or grand, maybe just a story for entertainment. And from there, by extension, in the mid-16th century, it became a joke, something specifically intended to amuse.
So it went from something worthy of a grand epic poem to a witty remark you might make in casual conversation. That's a massive downgrade in gravitas, isn't it?
It is indeed. This profound semantic shift from serious grand actions to lighthearted amusement suggests a significant societal evolution in what constitutes a tale worth telling or an exploit worth celebrating. It reflects perhaps a cultural pivot from solemn historical records, epic narratives, and the celebration of grand feats towards the everyday pursuit of humor, amusement, and lighter forms of storytelling. It makes you wonder, are we as a society increasingly seeking amusement over grand narratives, or has our definition of heroic simply shifted? It's a linguistic mirror reflecting changing values.
Jeopardy is another fascinating one, starting from a very specific game concept, balanced odds, and then morphing into a much broader, more dramatic meaning of just danger.
Jeopardy, from Middle English, was originally spelled "eu parti." It came from Old French "eu parti," which literally means an evenly divided game.
Ah, divided game.
Exactly. The term was originally used in chess and other strategy games to refer to a problem or a position where the chances of winning or losing were precisely evenly balanced, a 50-50 chance, a really specific technical term.
So a point of absolute uncertainty in a game.
Precisely. This precise meaning of balanced odds and uncertainty then quite logically led directly to the more general sense of a dangerous situation or risk, where the outcome is uncertain and potentially negative. What's fascinating here is how a very specific concept from game theory, a balanced equilibrium of chance, gave rise to such a broad, dramatic, and widely understood meaning of peril.
So the next time I'm watching the game show Jeopardy, I'll be thinking about chessboards and balanced odds, not just categories and trivia. That adds a whole new layer of meta meaning. It really does change how you hear it.
Exactly. It adds a richness to our everyday vocabulary when we understand these hidden layers. And speaking of games, Joule has a surprising connection back to games or play, too, which seems totally counterintuitive for something of such high value.
A jewel from play.
It does seem odd, doesn't it? Joule, from Middle English, comes from Old French joule. This seems to come from jeu, meaning game or play.
Je. Like in je partie.
Exactly. And perhaps even ultimately from Latin jocus, which meant jest or playful talk.
So related to jest and joke, maybe.
Possibly. It first referred generally to a decorative piece worn for personal adornment. Shakespeare used it this way in Twelfth Night. Here, wear this jewel for me to my picture.
Just an ornament.
Yes. Later, it specifically came to mean an ornament containing a precious stone, or the gem itself, like a diamond or ruby. Jeweler and jewelry come from the same period and roots.
But that connection to play or jest for something so valuable is strange.
This surprising link raises an important question. Was the early jewel seen more as a plaything, perhaps, a token of amusement, or whimsical adornment, rather than primarily just a static symbol of wealth or status? Its link to play is quite unexpected for something we now associate with such immense value and beauty. It suggests maybe a shift in how we perceive and value objects of adornment over time.
Maybe early jewels were more about fun and less about showing off wealth.
Perhaps. It points to a time when adornment might have been more about personal expression and amusement, rather than just ostentatious display.
And the general idea of entertainment, maybe jesting, connects to juggle, which also seems to have narrowed its focus significantly over time from general entertainer to a very specific skill.
It does. Juggle, the verb, from late Middle English in its early examples, meant something broader, to entertain with jesting, tricks, etc.
So not just throwing things.
Not necessarily, no. It comes from Old French jocular, from Latin joculare to jest, which again comes from joculus, a diminutive of jocus jest. So the jest connection is strong. Interestingly, the noun juggler is actually earlier from Old English egulare, which meant magician or conjurer.
Ah, so juggler was originally a magician.
Yes, but the current senses of the verb juggle, specifically referring to the dexterous manipulation of objects thrown in the air, date only from the late 19th century.
So quite a late specialization.
It shows how the meaning narrowed dramatically from a general entertainer who might encompass storytellers, musicians, jesters, magicians, like a medieval minstrel, to a very specific physical skill involving impressive hand-eye coordination. It reflects a specialization of performance over time, where a broad category of entertainment became a highly defined art form.
Jot is such a quick, small action jotting something down, and its origin is rooted in the smallest of things, which I find very elegant. A tiny letter, right?
It is very elegant. Jot, from the late 15th century, comes via Latin from Greek iota,
Iota.
which is the ninth and crucially the smallest letter of the Greek alphabet. So in the noun form, the notion of smallness predominates. Shakespeare famously used it in The Merchant of Venice. This bond does give thee here no jot of blood, meaning not even the slightest drop, the smallest conceivable amount.
Not one iota. We still say that.
Exactly. Then the verb form, to jot, first recorded in the early 18th century, focuses on the short, sharp action of writing quickly and briefly, as in jotted notes down in a meeting.
Quick and small.
It's an excellent example of how a very specific concept, the smallest letter, becomes a general indicator of minimal quantity, not one jot. And then through association with brevity, a rapid, brief action, jot it down.
And two words that seem so different now, journal and journey, actually share a deeply fundamental root in the concept of a day. That's one of those connections that just makes you pause and think, wow.
What's truly fascinating here is that both words, despite their very different modern meanings, indeed share a core origin in the concept of a day. Let's take journal. From late Middle English, it originally referred quite literally to a book listing daily prayers or maybe daily accounts.
A daily record.
Yes, it comes from Old French journal, which directly derives from late Latin diurnalsis belonging to a day.
Diurnal, like animals active during the day.
Exactly, same root. This then evolved into diary in the early 17th century, a daily record of thoughts, and then daily newspaper or publication by the mid-18th century. It always retains that connection to the daily cycle.
So anything that's a daily record, whether spiritual, personal, or public news, makes sense.
Precisely. And then journey, from Middle English, comes from Old French journée.
Related to jour in French, day.
Exactly. Journée meant day, but also a day's travel or a day's work. Those were its earliest senses in English, how much you could travel or accomplish in a single day.
Right, a day's journey.
Its base is Latin diurnum, daily portion, from diurnus daily, which comes from dies, the Latin word for day.
Guys, like carpe diem.
Exactly. Even the word journeyman, which is a compound from late Middle English, is based on journey in that obsolete sense of a day's work. Because a journeyman, once they were no longer an apprentice bound by indentures, was typically paid by the day, literally for a day's journey of work.
Wow, paid by the day.
This beautifully illustrates how fundamental temporal units like the day shaped our language for both keeping records and for traveling and working over distances. It really reveals the rhythms of ancient life embedded right there in our words.
Okay, joust and jostle seem clearly related, like pushing or coming together. But then jostle has a truly surprising original meaning that completely changes how you think about it. What was it?
They are definitely connected, stemming from a shared root. Joust, from Middle English, meant join battle, engage, specifically in that formal martial combat between two knights on horseback.
Knights charging at each other.
Yes, it comes from Old French jouster, bring together or engage, which is based on Latin juxta, meaning near or next to, implying two things coming together, often violently. The historical spelling was often just. Just.
Yeah.
Then jostle, from late Middle English, was early spelled jostle and comes directly from just, that earlier form of joust. So the connection to bringing together or pushing is clear.
So far, so logical. Pushing, shoving, jostling. But then what happened? What was the original meaning?
However, the truly surprising detail, as you hinted, is that its original recorded sense was to have sexual intercourse with.
What? No.
What?
Really?
Yes, according to the source. A direct and explicit meaning. Its current sense is that we know shove, push roughly against, date from the mid-16th century.
So it had that explicit meaning for a while before it shifted.
It appears so. This is a prime example of linguistic taboos and how meanings can shift, often to become more socially acceptable, or perhaps just to generalize a physical action. The physical act of pushing together or engaging closely was repurposed, either due to euphemism or just a broadening of the physical action, transforming an explicit term into a much more general one for physical contact in a crowd.
That's amazing. You'd never, ever guess that in a million years. Wow. Okay, moving on to something maybe less shocking. Jubilee and jubilant, Both have such a joyful sound, and it seems that sound, that feeling of celebration, is key to their origins.
It is, absolutely. The sound is central.
Mm.
Jubilee, from late Middle English, comes from Old French jubilee, which is from late Latin jubileus, annus, meaning, of
The
jubilee.
Jubilee year.
Yes. This was based on the Hebrew word yobel. In Jewish history, this referred to a significant year of emancipation and restoration, kept every 50 years, where debts were forgiven and slaves were freed. A huge deal.
A year of freedom and starting over.
Exactly. But crucially, the Hebrew word yobel originally meant ram's horn trumpet, the shofar.
Ah, the trumpet.
Yes, the instrument with which this sacred Jubilee year was proclaimed.
So the powerful, joyful sound of the trumpet, signifying freedom and celebration, is literally in the word's DNA. That's incredible.
Exactly. The sound became synonymous with the celebratory event itself. And then jubilant, from the mid-17th century, originally meant making a joyful noise, or rejoicing exuberantly.
Making a joyful noise.
It comes from Latin jubilant, which is the present participial stem of the verb jubilare. And jubilare meant call out halloo, shout for joy. This Latin verb was particularly used by early Christian writers to mean shout for joy, often in a religious context.
So both words come back to shouting for joy or the sound of a celebratory horn.
Precisely. Though distinct in their immediate origins, one tied to a specific historical event, the other more general, they are beautifully connected by this root sound and the powerful, exultant expression it signifies. Whether for a specific historical moment of emancipation or a broader, uninhibited emotional outpouring of celebration, it's the sound of unbridled joy captured in language.
And finally, in this section of semantic shifts, a whole family of words stemming from the act of judgment itself, judge and its entire legal family, justice, judicial, etc. That seems like a very foundational concept for language, for society, really.
It is, and this is a perfect example of how a single powerful root concept can give rise to a whole conceptual domain in language, particularly in the realms of law and ethics. Judge, the word, comes into Middle English from Old French juge,
Juge.
which is from the Latin word judex. Now, this Latin root judex is a fascinating combination of two distinct elements. Jus, meaning law or right.
Jews, like injustice.
Exactly. And disse, meaning to say or to declare.
Dicere, like in dictate or dictionary.
Precisely. So fundamentally, a judge, a judex, is someone who literally says the law or pronounces what is right according to the law. This core concept then expands outwards to create an entire family of legal and moral terms, all revolving around the idea of legal decision-making, assessment, and what is right.
So that core idea of saying the law gives us words like justice, obviously, but also judicial, judicious, judiciary, justify. They all seem to contain that root.
They do. The Middle English word judgment comes from Old French judgment, derived from juger, to judge. Judicial, from late Middle English, is from Latin judicialis, meaning pertaining to a judge or judgment. From the same Latin root, judicium, judgment, we get the late 16th century judicious, meaning showing good judgment or wisdom.
Makes sense.
And the early 19th century judiciary, referring to the whole system of courts and judges. Even the word justify comes ultimately from Christian Latin justificare, to do justice to, stemming from Latin justus, just right.
Doing what's right.
And think about the phrase, as grave or sober as a judge, recorded from the mid-17th century. That further highlights the deeply ingrained cultural perception of the solemnity, the seriousness, the impartiality associated with this role. It beautifully illustrates how the act of saying what is law or right becomes the foundation for an entire branch of vocabulary concerning law, ethics, and assessment, all radiating from that single ancient root jus.
Okay, this has been a truly astonishing journey through J words so far, but language isn't just about ancient roots, is it? It's constantly evolving. New words and meanings emerge from contemporary culture, from technology, even from just quirks of human behavior. It makes you wonder what words we're making up today that will have wild histories in, say, 100 years.
Exactly. This next section really illustrates that language is a living, breathing entity, constantly adapting to new phenomena and cultural shifts. It encourages critical thinking about how new forms become necessary and how some words capture very specific cultural nuances of their time, nuances that might otherwise be lost to history. They become linguistic time capsules of their era.
Like jaywalk. It's such a specific action, crossing the street improperly, and has this amusing origin tied to a bird and, well, an insult.
Jaywalk, an early 20th century verb, is formed in part on jay. Now, jay is usually the name of a bird from the crow family. known for being noisy and maybe a bit foolish looking.
The bird, yeah.
However, jay was also used colloquially, particularly in American English around that time, to mean a silly, inexperienced, or heedless person, like a country bumpkin maybe.
Ah, calling someone a jay.
Yes. So it's an instance of an animal's name used in a derogatory sense for a person, becoming associated with a specific, informal, rule-breaking human action, walking carelessly or imprudently in traffic, as if one were a silly or inattentive person, like a jay wandering into the road. It's a wonderfully descriptive and slightly judgmental coinage.
And then two words that capture entire musical genres and cultural movements, jazz and jive. They also have quite enigmatic origins, don't they? Which feels fitting for the music itself somehow.
They do. The origin of jazz from the early 20th century remains one of the most enduring mysteries in etymology, despite numerous suggestions over the years.
What are some of the theories?
Well, some believe it took its name from a real person, perhaps Jasbo Brown, a black itinerant musician in the South. Others suggest it's a term from an African patois, maybe meaning excite or hurry up, reflecting the music's energy, or even related to slang terms for vitality or sexual energy. We just don't know for sure.
The mystery suits the music.
It often reflects the spontaneous, boundary-pushing, and eclectic nature of the cultural phenomena. It describes a music that defied easy categorization right from the start. Then there's jive.
Jive talking.
Right. Also from the 1920s US, it originally meant meaningless or misleading speech, like insincere or deceptive talk. Its origin is also unknown, but its later musical sense, meaning jazz, or particularly swing music, gave rise to a dance performed to jazz in the 1940s.
So the talk came before the music.
It seems the sense of misleading talk came first. Then it got associated with the lively, perhaps sometimes exuberant or showy nature of the music and dance style. This shows how terms can overlap or influence each other in rich cultural contexts, particularly in the vibrant world of music and slang, where meanings are often fluid and evolving very quickly.
Junkie is another one that has a pretty clear but kind of grim progression from discarded objects to a drug context.
Junkie dates from the 1920s in the U.S., specifically in drug context referring to a drug addict. It's directly based on the word junk.
And junk itself means?
Junk itself goes back to late Middle English, where it first meant old or inferior rope on ships. Then, by the mid-19th century, it broadened to mean old and discarded articles generally worthless refuse, scrap.
So trash, basically.
Yes. The progression is clear, if harsh. From valueless waste, the sense was then applied metaphorically to addiction, highlighting a societal judgment about those who are addicted as being somehow discarded or worthless, akin to scrap material. It's a stark metaphorical extension.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy.
It's important to note, though, as the source points out for clarity, that the word junk, used to denote a type of sailing vessel particularly common in East Asia, is completely unrelated in origin, just a coincidence of spelling.
Good to know. Okay, jukebox sounds like it might be related to jazz or jive, but it has a different cultural origin, doesn't it? Tied to something more unruly.
It does. Jukebox, the coin-operated music machine, dates from the 1930s. It's based on a word from Creole, specifically gullah-de-juke.
Gullah, spoken where?
Gullah is a Creole language spoken by African Americans in the coastal regions of South Carolina and Georgia. And the word juke in Gullah meant disorderly, wicked, or rowdy.
Disorderly.
Yes. A juke house, or juke joint, was originally a roadside establishment, often a bit rough and tumble, offering music, often blues or early jazz, dancing, and gambling.
Ah, so the machine got its name from the rowdy places it was often found in.
Yeah, exactly. It highlights the cultural specificity of its origin and how a word from a particular dialect or Creole can enter mainstream English. It sometimes sheds some of its original connotations we don't necessarily think disorderly when we see a jukebox now, but it retains a hint of its lively, unrefined, and culturally rich beginnings.
And finally, jerry-built. A word we still use all the time to describe something poorly constructed, flimsy. It has a couple of competing theories about where it came from, right? The mystery almost adds to its descriptive power.
Jerry-built from the mid-19th century indeed has an unknown origin, but it's accompanied by some fascinating theories, as you say.
What are they?
One theory suggests it comes from the name of a specific firm of builders in Liverpool who were notorious for putting up shoddy buildings using cheap materials very quickly.
Plausible.
Another, perhaps more culturally resonant theory is that it alludes to the walls of Jericho falling down so suddenly at the sound of Joshua's trumpets, as described in the Bible.
Ah, the walls just collapsed, like a badly built house.
Exactly. The quote from Joshua 6.2 famously states, "And it came to pass, when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat." This connection, even if not historically accurate, suggests how humans try to make sense of unknown word origins by connecting them to known stories or powerful cultural associations. It's a kind of linguistic folk etymology, creating a plausible narrative where the actual history might be lost.
Wow, what a deep dive this has been. We started with Jack, the ultimate everyman, and ended up spanning centuries and cultures, from ancient astrological beliefs giving us jovial, to wartime necessity creating Jeep and jerry can, to music hall songs birthing jingoism, and even biblical stories possibly influencing jerry built. It truly shows how dynamic language is constantly shifting, absorbing new meanings, and reflecting pretty much the entire human journey.
That's precisely right. What this deep dive into just one letter truly reveals is that words are not merely static tools for communication. They are these incredibly rich capsules of history, culture, and profound human experience. Each word carries echoes of its past, enriching our present understanding and revealing the fascinating, often surprising ways we conceptualize and categorize the world around us. It's a powerful reminder that language is a living testament to human ingenuity, belief, folly, and adaptation.
Absolutely. So, for you listening, the next time you jot down a note, or maybe describe something as janky, which it probably relates to jerry built or junk, or even just put on a jacket before you head out on your next journey. Maybe just pause for a second and wonder what other surprising hidden histories those words might reveal, or think about what new meaning they might take on in the future for someone else. It really is a never-ending journey of discovery, wouldn't you agree?
I couldn't agree more, and it raises an important, maybe even provocative question for us all to think about. As technology and culture continue to accelerate at this incredible pace, are we creating words with even shorter, more transient histories now? Or will some of today's fleeting slang, the memes, the online jargon, actually become the deeply rooted etymological puzzles for future generations to unravel, just like jingo or jovial are for us? The deep dive into language never truly ends because language itself never ever stops evolving.